From the quiet suburbs of California in the 1970s to the peaceful towns of the 1980s, an unseen terror haunted families behind closed doors. Over the course of more than a decade, a masked man broke into homes, tied up couples, and committed brutal sexual assaults, leaving fear, trauma, and unanswered questions in his wake. He became known to the police as the East Area Rapist, and later, as his crimes escalated to murder, the chilling name Original Night Stalker would be whispered in horror across the state. Despite hundreds of victims and dozens of attacks, no one could uncover his identity. For decades, he eluded the law, vanishing as suddenly as he appeared, leaving investigators with only fragments of evidence and terrified communities desperate for answers. It wasn't until technology advanced decades later that the shadow that had haunted California would finally be unmasked, revealing a shocking truth that would shake the nation. To understand the magnitude of the Golden State Killer's reign of terror, we need to step back to California in the late 1970s. Families lived in quiet suburban neighborhoods, unaware that danger lurked just beyond their windows. At first, the crimes seemed like ordinary burglaries, but patterns quickly emerged. Homes were being targeted while couples slept inside, ropes and ligatures were left behind, and the perpetrator often taunted his victims with cryptic notes or chilling phone calls. The man moved through towns almost unseen, yet the terror he left in his wake was unforgettable. His crimes spanned multiple counties, connecting seemingly unrelated cases across the state. Over the years, he escalated from sexual assaults to cold-blooded murders, demonstrating a cunning and methodical mind that baffled investigators. Police at the time had limited technology, no DNA profiling as we know it today, and relied on witness sketches, crime scene forensics, and intuition. Despite their best efforts, the identity of the Golden State Killer remained a mystery for decades, leaving families traumatized and communities on edge, and planting the seeds of one of the most infamous manhunts in American history. From the quiet suburbs of California in the mid-1970s, a shadow moved unseen, leaving terror in its wake. Families believed their neighborhoods were safe, yet behind locked doors, danger waited. A masked man broke into homes, often in the dead of night, targeting couples as they slept. He tied them up, sometimes taunting them with cryptic words, leaving behind a chilling signature. Over time, law enforcement would identify this predator as the East Area Rapist, a man who seemed to strike without pattern, leaving police frustrated and victims paralyzed with fear. His crimes were not random acts of violence, they were methodical, calculated, and horrifyingly intimate. In a single attack, a neighborhood's sense of safety could be shattered forever. Decades would pass, and the terror would continue, with the perpetrator escalating to murder, eventually earning the ominous title Original Night Stalker. For years, no one knew who he was. Families lived in constant fear, and investigators were left with few clues. It would take decades, new technology, and an extraordinary breakthrough to unmask the man who had eluded justice for so long, finally bringing an end to a reign of terror that haunted California for over a decade. California in the 1970s was a landscape of calm suburban streets, children riding bikes, and families living quiet lives. But amidst this idyllic setting, a predator lurked, striking homes across multiple counties. Initially, these crimes seemed like ordinary burglaries. Houses entered, valuables stolen, but a disturbing pattern quickly emerged. The East Area Rapist, as police would come to call him, did not simply steal. He terrorized his victims, often tying them up and leaving behind notes or making threatening phone calls. Each attack followed a similar methodology, and each crime left a community shaken, reinforcing the terror that someone could invade even the most private spaces. Over time, the perpetrator's audacity grew, and his crimes escalated into murders. Victims were no longer just terrorized, lives were taken. Police at the time had limited investigative tools. Forensic science was rudimentary, DNA profiling was decades away, and investigators relied heavily on eyewitness sketches and fragmented clues. The case became one of the most confounding investigations in American history. Families struggled with fear and trauma, while law enforcement tirelessly worked, trying to piece together the puzzle of a criminal who seemed always one step ahead. The stage was set for one of the longest and most notorious manhunts in the country. The Golden State Killer's first known attacks occurred in Sacramento, California, in the mid-1970s, homes were broken into quietly, victims restrained, and assaults carried out with horrifying precision. Each crime demonstrated a level of planning and cunning that left police frustrated. Witnesses described seeing a masked man, often at night, moving silently in the shadows. Over time, patterns emerged. The perpetrator targeted similar neighborhoods, used rope to bind victims, and frequently returned to observe his victims' routines. He became more daring, expanding his reach into multiple counties, escalating his crimes from sexual assault to murder. Victims' lives were forever altered, with trauma that lasted decades. Police began to connect cases by modus operandi, noticing similarities in the way attacks were executed and locations selected. Despite tireless work, arrests were impossible. The criminal was meticulous and vanished without leaving identifiable evidence. Neighborhoods were gripped with fear, and families lived with constant anxiety, locking doors and peering into the night. The East Area rapist became a legend of horror, with his name whispered among fearful communities. By the time he became known as the original Night Stalker, his crimes had already claimed multiple lives, leaving a trail of grief and confusion, and establishing a chilling legacy that would remain unsolved for decades. For decades, the case of the Golden State Killer remained a cold case, frustrating investigators across California. Law enforcement preserved evidence meticulously, hoping that someday technology would catch up to the criminal. DNA samples collected from crime scenes were stored, fingerprints analyzed, but conventional methods failed to identify the perpetrator. Families waited for answers, some giving up hope, while detectives never stopped revisiting leads. The breakthrough came decades later with the emergence of genetic genealogy, a method of tracing suspects through DNA connections in public ancestry databases. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA and began analyzing distant relatives, constructing family trees to narrow down potential suspects. This painstaking process finally led them to Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer living in California. DNA testing confirmed the unimaginable. D'Angelo was the Golden State Killer. The arrest in April 2018 shocked the nation, ending one of the most infamous unsolved crime sprees in American history. Police finally had the suspect in custody, and decades of terror, confusion, and unanswered questions began to be addressed. The case demonstrated the remarkable power of technology and perseverance in law enforcement, showing that even the most elusive criminals can be brought to justice. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo in 2018 marked the end of a decades-long nightmare for California and the families of his victims. Court proceedings revealed the horrifying scale of his crimes. Over 50 rapes and 13 murders, each meticulously documented by investigators. To avoid the death penalty, D'Angelo pleaded guilty, receiving life imprisonment without parole. Victims and communities finally received a measure of closure, though the scars of his attacks remain. Beyond justice, the case became a landmark in criminal investigation. Genetic genealogy emerged as a revolutionary tool, enabling law enforcement to solve cases previously considered unsolvable. Books, documentaries, and media coverage, including I'll Be Gone in the Dark, brought renewed attention to the victims' stories and the relentless efforts of detectives. The Golden State Killer case reminds the world of the enduring impact of violent crime, the resilience of victims, and the perseverance of law enforcement. It serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to justice delayed but not denied. Even decades later, the shadow of fear and suspense lingers, immortalizing one of the most chilling and infamous criminal cases in American history. The story of the Golden State Killer is more than a tale of crime. It is a chilling reminder of how fear can linger in communities, how lives can be forever altered, and how one person's calculated violence can leave a trail of heartbreak spanning decades. Yet, it is also a story of perseverance, patience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. For over 40 years, detectives never gave up, meticulously preserving evidence and revisiting leads, determined to bring closure to victims and families who had lived in fear for far too long. The arrest and conviction of Joseph James D'Angelo finally ended a reign of terror that had haunted California for generations, proving that even the most elusive criminals cannot hide forever. Beyond justice, This case revolutionized criminal investigation, showing the world the power of genetic genealogy, the importance of preserving evidence, and the hope that science and determination can solve even the coldest cases. As we reflect on the lives impacted and the long shadow of these crimes, we are reminded that justice, though sometimes delayed, can prevail and that truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how long it takes.